moments of just totally wanting to become vegan and feeling really disgusted by it, and then moments of just, which I still do, desperately wanting to go and have my own cows, and then wanting to be a relief milker. So I felt like I just went like this for 18 months and just had regular existential crises and went, what the hell am I doing? I think the dairy industry is totally fucked.
Why have we devalued food so much? Why is milk cheaper than water? It's because we no longer live, as particularly if we grow up in urban environments, in a way that brings us into contact with the way in which our food is produced.
Is it actually a feasible way of living that we look after cows, drink their milk, but don't kill them? Can it be done? And the conclusion I came to is, yes, it is indeed possible. But we would have to drink less milk and pay a lot more money for it, like 3 to 4 times as much.
We all know, we all understand that in some faith groups there's food is incredibly important in their spiritual practice. So you just have to think of Islam or Judaism or Hinduism. And if you think of even Christianity, you know, food is at the heart of the most sacred act of the Christian Mass. But I think it's probably fair to say that when it comes to the wide environmental aspects of food and sustainability, faiths haven't, you know, they haven't made those connections in the way that so many of us haven't made them either.
So there are approximately 7 billion people on the planet at the moment, and a very, very large proportion of all the crops grown, probably 40% of all crops grown are fed to livestock, and in northern countries, maybe 70% of all crops grown are used for feeding livestock. Those crops could theoretically feed 3.5 billion people, so half the world's population. So what are we doing with livestock at all? Well, the answer to that question has probably been mentioned. There are many parts of the world that are actually unsuitable for growing crops, and actually naturally are grassland and suitable for grazing livestock. And many of the people who live in these areas are dependent upon livestock. And in fact, to go beyond there, 1 billion of the world's poorest people, particularly living in low to middle income countries, are dependent upon livestock. They have generally subsistence farming with mixed crop livestock farms, and they have a very closely integrated agriculture where livestock and growing of crops are closely connected.
What most people don't realise, and I know very well as a farmer, is that actually that continuous crop production is not sustainable. It's not sustainable because it depends on dangerous chemicals, nitrogen fertiliser, which is produced from fossil fuels, which are very finite resource, pesticides, which are having a wide range of impacts on the environment and almost certainly on our health as well. But more particularly, it's not sustainable because crop production degrades soil. 52% of global soils are already severely or moderately degraded. We're losing 24 billion tonnes of soil every year on the planet due to intensive farming systems growing crops. When you put grass down, you lose very little soil. You generally, grass, if it's done properly, grass is the one restorative crop. And if you put a hedgerow around it and plant trees in there, you'll double the amount of carbon you're actually fixing. The grass will fix carbon, and so will the trees.
In fact, if we could return to a system of farming where we had types of cows that didn't necessarily produce quite so much milk, that didn't require to be fed on so much grain and soya and human food and be associated with environmental destruction in the Cerrado, etc., that produced male calves that could be reared for beef and preferably most of that time reared on the natural grassland we had in this country, we could be in a much, much better place.
It's if you look at when you convert grassland to crop production, and that's what's happening in large parts of the world as people move away from eating red meat animals, that grassland gets ploughed up to grow crops. It's what many people in the campaign world have actually silently advocated. But then you actually release a huge amount of carbon and nitrogen from the soil, both of which come up in the form of polluting greenhouse gases. So the impact you have on the environment, on the atmosphere, is greater than the actual problem that we do have from methane from ruminants. The methane from ruminants does not add to carbon in the atmosphere because the carbon is recycled. A ruminant can't breathe out more carbon in the methane than it takes in plant material. Now, okay, while it's methane, it is having a global warming effect. But if you contrast that with the methane that comes from coal mining, from natural gas extraction, and other forms of fossil fuel production, that's fresh carbon going into the atmosphere every year. But with ruminants, they're taking the carbon comes with photosynthesis through the plants that they consume, and then they breathe it back out again. So for me, ruminant methane is contributing 2.7% to global greenhouse gas, global warming.
Is food political? Yes, absolutely. I mean, for me, food is the most political act because it's so available and accessible to everyone.